Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's ESG-CV state recipient office hours. We'll just give it about another minute so everyone can log on. All right, it looks like the majority of the people that are here are now on. Welcome, everybody. My name is Natalie Metzger-Smith. I am a technical assistance provider for TAC, and you are here for the ESG-CV state recipient office hours. Next slide. All right, many of you probably have attended these office hours in the last year, but just as a reminder, we are recording this webinar and we will be sending out a slide deck and a copy of the chat and Q&A within the next few days. We are working to archive the office hours recording and all the meeting materials, and they are posted on the HUD Exchange. I believe we have posted up through February, and so be on the lookout for those other materials as well. Just a few announcements before we get started. Hot off the press, yesterday HUD posted a summary of the ESG program waivers and alternative requirements. I know many of you are anxiously awaiting that. What this does, it lists each waiver, what it does, and whether it was applicable to ESG, annual ESG, COVID or non-COVID response. If the waiver is expired, it'll say what date expired, and it just really, I think, does a great job of organizing all of the waivers, which should be helpful for you as you're preparing for monitoring. And then also, if you haven't had a chance to take a look at it yet, be sure to check out the ESG-CV duplication of benefits product that was released about a week ago. It is modeled after that CDBG-CV quick guide, if you've been using that. But this is now the first place where you want to go if you have any questions at all about duplication of benefits. You know, it talks about how to apply it to the project level, how to apply it to the participant level. It includes a duplication of benefits checklist, which, you know, has a really great list of questions that you can use when you know, talking with the household, and as well as examples of policies and procedures. So the goal with this obviously is just to make sure that the right household gets the right amount of assistance that they need. So be sure to check that out. And then also, if you haven't seen this yet, this is really exciting, and it's been a work in progress for well over a year, but HUD has published an ESG onboarding kit. And this is super awesome, especially because I know a lot of you are still onboarding subrecipients for your ESG-CV grant. And, you know, obviously there's lots of turnover and agencies are still bringing on lots of staff. And what this is, it's a tool that you can use to you know, onboard your new ESG staff. And it's organized according to grant administrator, program directors, rapid rehousing supervisors, case managers. And it takes about 3 to 4 hours. It's interactive. It's a series of videos. It has lots of tools. Definitely check it out. Next slide. And then we also want to present to you, we debuted a new AAQ desk, and it is the Homelessness and Infectious Disease Question AAQ desk. So make sure that you use this AAQ if you have any questions about infectious disease outbreaks, not just COVID, but for any infectious disease such as Hep A or tuberculosis among people experiencing homelessness. And in this, it also has best practices on protocols for infectious disease, mitigation and prevention in homeless response systems, and it's staffed by the disaster response team that we all got to know so well over these last couple of years. So glad their expertise isn't going away. They are still here if you need them. Just make sure that you use the AAQ to do so. And obviously, you can always reach out to a TA provider or submit a request for technical assistance. All right, so today, very exciting. We are going to be, I don't know if many of you were on yesterday's ESG-CV recipient webinar, where we talked about strategies to meet the 50% IDIS deadline. But we're also going to be talking about that today, but we're going to be doing it more with a programmatic lens instead of the fiscal lens. And we really want to dig into some of those things that you as program administrators and recipients can do to strategize on how to expend your money. This is also another great opportunity to ask questions that you have, and I'd really like for this to be interactive. So I'm going to ask some questions throughout the webinar, and if would love for you to come off mute, just raise your hand and Laura Harris will take you off mute, because I'd love to hear some of your thoughts and feedback on just all the work that's going on at the ground level to expend your funds. All right, so now I'm going to kick it off to Heidi, who's going to talk a little bit about what we're doing here and some IDIS tips and tricks to help support you as you're trying to figure out the best way to tackle this goal of ours.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast, and sorry, it's still early in the morning for those of you who are farther west than the East Coast. But in April 2022, so just last month, HUD issued the new CPD notice 2206, and that notice changed significantly the progressive expenditure deadline. So previously, recipients, there was an 80% expenditure deadline for the end of March 2022, and that changed with this new notice. And so instead of having that 80% expenditure deadline, instead it is a 50% draw deadline. And that draw deadline is June 16th, which I'm sure you guys are all looking at a calendar. That's less than a month away from now. And so that deadline is really to allow SNAPs the ability to recapture funds that aren't being used and move them to communities that are spending quite a bit of CARES money. And that deadline allows SNAPs to do it in a bit more of an efficient process. And so really everybody's looking at draws in IDIS right now and calculating them based on where you are and looking towards June 16th and seeing where you'll be on June 16th, and then decisions will be made. And you can click that link and read all of the fine print details, because we all know the devil's in the details for that notice. And hopefully that's not brand new information to anyone at this point in time. But next slide, please. All right. I'm an IDIS person. Most of you, I think I've even recognized a bunch of names on the panel or participants here. I manage the IDIS Ask a Question on the HUD Exchange. I've probably emailed you in the past if you have an IDIS question, or someone from your fiscal department if they've had an IDIS question. So I'm here to talk about my beloved IDIS, the Integrated Disbursement and Information System. Next slide, please. And so just some quick reminders, especially I know for states, because I think more often than not for the state recipients, you have a whole separate fiscal department who manages, creates vouchers and approves vouchers in IDIS. And so it's really important for everyone at the program level is to remember it takes 2 people to complete a voucher in IDIS. So you're going to have person A is going to create that voucher in IDIS. Person B then has to approve that voucher, and they both have to do that. You cannot have one person create and approve a voucher in IDIS. It has to be 2 separate people. So I just wanted to put that out there, because we know June 14th, June 15th, June 16th, there might be a little bit of a panic and somebody might be out, and it takes 2 people. So now is really a good time to identify who does that and who is their backup, and maybe have a backup to the backup, just because you don't want to be at the very last minute and oh, wow, we don't have anyone to approve the voucher. And the person who approves the voucher, oh, they created the voucher because they were the backup to creating the voucher. So we need to have two people. So now's the time to really make sure that you have the folks who can do that in IDIS. Next slide, please. And then just again, some good IDIS reminders. First and foremost, there is a 1-day lag between any information entered into IDIS and what shows up on all of the wonderful reports. And so that's really important to remember because, right now people are really looking at the reports and then trying to reconcile that with their own internal fiscal records and then looking at IDIS, and you might actually see 3 different things. And you might see 3 different things because someone earlier that day created a voucher in IDIS or changed activity funding or did something in IDIS. And so if you're looking at a report that's timestamped for today, that's actually showing yesterday's information. So just keep that in mind. If there is a little bit of discrepancy, it's more often than not related to that 1-day lag. The second thing that I wanted to stress, on the IDIS Ask a Question, we get a ton of questions from people who can't log into IDIS. And the reason being is they're trying to log in outside of its hours of operation. So IDIS is only up and running Monday through Saturday from 7 a.m. Eastern time to 10 p.m. Eastern time. And so for those of you on the West Coast, those of you farther west on the West Coast, our dear friends in Hawaii, you run into this more often than not, where, you've got to have your day planned out a little bit more in advance because IDIS is going to shut down a lot earlier in the day for you than it is for me on the East Coast. So just be aware of that. And it bears repeating, IDIS is not operational at all on Sundays. And we get a lot of questions with that. It's more so related to con plans and annual action plans, but it's not operational at all on Sundays. Anything else to add here?
I think I just want to, this is all really good information. Thanks, Heidi. I just would like to remind folks that you should probably also double check to ensure that your award amount reflects what is an IDIS, especially if you've moved money around in the last couple of years. Make sure that those changes were captured in IDIS, and then also make sure your fiscal teams are in the loop so the amounts that they have reflect that the ones that you have in IDIS as well. So make sure it's just everyone's on the same page and that you're looking at the same numbers.
Exactly. Next slide, please. And so perfect segue into making sure that your amounts match up with what's in IDIS right now or yesterday, because this report is a day later. This first report, the PR91 ESG Financial Summary Report, you can run this specifically for your CARES grant, which I think is probably the area of focus right now. And it's going to show you, what's your grant amount, what's been committed to activities. That means it's funded to activities. And so, what if there's a discrepancy there, if your report is showing that you have funds available to commit, what happened? Why have they not been entered in IDIS? Were there changes in contracts? Is that money about to be, funded in IDIS? Just make sure, that again, that's accurate. And then looking at your activity components, your categories, does what's funded or committed here for street outreach, does that line up with your internal fiscal records? Does the drawn amount line up with your fiscal records? That's really the area that's getting a lot of attention right now. And so seeing, do these numbers line up with what our fiscal staff has, with what our program staff have, and is IDIS accurate? Because right now, we really want it to be accurate because, again, on June 16th, that is a 50% draw deadline. And so this is a great report. I'm actually going to show it in a little bit in IDIS, fingers crossed. And so, it's a really good report. You've got a one-page summary here of, at the very high level, what's your drawn amount, what's your balance to draw, what's the percentage, it does the math for you. So it's just a nice, quick one-page summary, if you will. So again, this is the PR91 ESG-CV Financial Summary Report. If you haven't looked at this report yet, I couldn't urge you more to please go ahead and look at this report. If you don't have access to IDIS, find someone at your organizational level that does, and have them send you this report. That's just something I would really recommend that you do at this particular moment in time. Next slide, please. And so moving on, there is a specific PR91 report called the PR91 ESG Subrecipient Vouchers. Again, you can run this report for your formula program. You can run it for your CARES program. Again, I think the CARES program is where you should be focusing right now for looking at this report. But it's really helpful because it's going to break down all of your subrecipients. It's going to give you their activity type, and then it's going to give you the voucher number, which we've blurred out here, and it's going to give you that paid date. And that helps you look at, is there a voucher missing? I thought somebody had a big voucher and I don't see it here. So that's a case where the voucher has been created in IDIS, but that second person, that person B, didn't approve it yet. It also lets you look at your subrecipients and see if, okay, they've been funded for more than one activity type. So, the second subrecipient listed here, they've been funded for administration, they've been funded for shelter, they've been funded for rapid rehousing. And just looking, okay, they have admin draws as late of April 5th, and a shelter draw also done on April 5th. Okay, that's looking good. Rapid rehousing hasn't had a voucher paid since December of 2021. That's where you really want to talk to your fiscal team and see, was an invoice submitted? Is it somewhere in the review process? If it hasn't been submitted, can you reach out to the subrecipient? Say, hey, we've noticed that you haven't had a payment for rapid rehousing since 2021. Can we get that from you? Do you have an eligible expense there? So it just gives you a little bit more information to, have that conversation, know the details that you need in that conversation, and be a little blunt and get to the point of what's going on. So yeah, it's a great report and hopefully I'll be able to open it up in IDIS. Any questions at this particular moment in time? Awesome. All right. I think next slide, and I think that's actually a blank slide, and I'm going to take over and I'm going to attempt to share my screen and go over here, talking out loud, and I'm going to go to IDIS. Actually, I've already changed my mind. I'm going to go to first the HUD Exchange, because I know sometimes there's a lot on the HUD Exchange. You maybe don't know where to look for things, and that's fine. I think everybody here can agree to that. And so if you want to find any type of IDIS resources, hover to the top, and there it is. It's right there, IDIS. And if you click on IDIS, it'll bring you to this page. All of the resources for IDIS can be found here in the View IDIS Guides, Tools, and Templates for webinars. You pick ESG, and they're all right here. So if you wanted to have the IDIS manual, that's where you find it. Happy to drop a link for it directly into the chat later on. Yesterday, someone asked a really good question. If there's a reports manual that shows all of the reports, that's right here as well. So those resources are right there for you on the HUD Exchange. But I'm going to sign into IDIS, and no pressure. I got to get my password right. All right, so here's IDIS. And so just some quick practices, make sure that your information is correct. So really focusing on the funding and drawdown piece, find your activities. If you were looking at that PR91 report and funding amounts didn't add up or they weren't accurate, you would have, again, either yourself or someone from your fiscal staff, depending on how, the separation of duties lines out in your organization, come into IDIS, come to this activity funding. And the best practice is to, if you're going to move funding from rapid rehousing to homelessness prevention, reduce that rapid rehousing activity first, just an example, and then increase the homelessness prevention activity. Same thing, if you're moving funding from one subrecipient to another, reduce first, then increase. So that's just an IDIS best practice. Always reduce down, hit save, and then go and make an increase on either a second subrecipient or a second activity. But I did want to show some of the reports that I just talked about. And so you would come over here to the reports, And you have to click again, super fun. And you want to go to the shared reports. They're listed in numerical order. And so some of the ESG specific reports, the PR91, it's going to be a bit of a scroll down, but I wanted to stop first. And the PR30 report, if you're sitting on this call today and you go, I don't have IDIS access, I don't know who does, and I don't know who has the ability to create a draw or approve a draw, have someone in your organization run this report. Comes out, you can print it as a PDF or save it as a PDF, save the trees, save it as a PDF, email it around, and you can see, who's active, who has what privilege, who can create a draw, who can approve a draw. So now's a really good time to get familiar with those folks and make sure you have a backup, because again, you don't want to be at that very last day and be in a panic. So that's a really good report to show who's active at your organization and who has what privileges. And then continuing scrolling down, I scrolled too far. Here are the ESG specific reports. I would really focus on the PR91 report at this point in time. So you have to hover over it and click the folder because there's a few different versions of it. So this is the report that I was showing earlier, the PR91 ESG-CV financial summary report. You would want to just click this as a PDF. It's got some graphs and tables. So formatting wise, it looks better as a PDF document. So that's all you would do. You would click as a PDF. You'd have to put, verify again the grant year, which for all of the CARES funding is going to be 2020. So you just click on it and move it on over. I have access to everybody, so it takes me a few extra clicks to find a specific grantee. But if you're just if you only have access to one profile, which most people only have access to one profile, it's pretty easy, and your grantee name's right there. You just move it over and then you hit export. And I apologize if Zoom is cutting that off because it's at the very, very, very bottom left-hand corner there. So that's that. And then if you wanted to go back, the other report that's really, really helpful is that PR91 ESG Subrecipients Vouchers report. So again, the report has a lot of merged cells. So from an Excel technical format, sometimes the format doesn't look super great as an Excel document. You certainly can run it as an Excel document, but it might be, for a first take at it, I would also recommend exporting it as a PDF document. And again, once it's a PDF, you can put highlight, you can put comments, all of those things in Adobe. So it's a really good report to look at. And so again, if you haven't looked at those reports, I would find them for your organization and just take a look and see, where you are at your activity category level and then where your subrecipients are. So I think those are the reports. Any questions? All right, I'm gonna stop sharing and then turn it over to Nora.
Heidi, your love for IDIS is infectious. Thank you for that great information. I think IDIS can be a little bit like the Land of Oz, like what's happening? Pay no attention behind that report. So thanks for demystifying it a little bit and sharing that great information. Heidi really stressed using IDIS and other communications methods to just make sure everyone has the same amount of information and looking at the same numbers. So that's really helpful. We wanted to also spend some time talking about if you're in a situation where you still have some capacity to use resources and you want to think about the best ways to use them, we have some things you might think about. Next slide, please. So eligible activities, some of these are new under the ESG-CV notice. Some of them are just regular old ESG, but we wanted to chat about them a little bit and then maybe get some feedback from you about any questions you're having related to some of these activities. So I'll kind of run through the list And then if you're having questions or have questions about these or other activities, we can spend a little bit of time chatting about that. So activities, we know rapid rehousing is one of the highest and best uses of ESG-CV, along with HMIS costs. I think HMIS is something that has always been eligible under ESG, and maybe because ESG, there hasn't been much of it, it hasn't always been allocated that way, but important to remember that HMIS is a cost that you can use ESG-CV for. Shelter renovation is another activity. Service packages connected to the emergency housing vouchers, testing and vaccine incentives, landlord incentives, infectious disease training for your staff, hazard pay, severance packages, and something that is maybe a cost area that hasn't been fully explored because of receiving this money during a public health crisis with other resources occurring, a lot going on. Basically, there's a lot going on. There might still be some opportunity to recoup some pre-award costs, which the ESG-CV notice does allow for, as long as those costs were incurred after January 20th, 2020, which is the federal date that was established as the start of the pandemic response, or whatever your local date was for COVID response. So if you have some costs that were occurred prior to that, they can still be reimbursed with ESG-CV. Of course, they still have to follow other appropriate requirements, like if there's an environmental review, that would have to still be done, and there's still certain regulatory requirements that had to be followed. But if you're finding that you had expenses that you weren't able to use another resource for, and you haven't reimbursed something else already, and they're ESG-CV eligible expenses for ESG-CV eligible people, even if you didn't have an award, you could work to use them using the pre-award allowance, I would suggest, because it does get a little complicated with record keeping, that kind of stuff. So if that's something you want to pursue, I really suggest reaching out to your state coach and having them work with you regarding that. Also, probably a good time to check in with the HUD field office to really look at the record keeping requirements for all of those kinds of things. So those are some things that we just wanted to present to you as maybe a reminder of ways that you can use your ESG-CV funds. Next slide. With those reminders and with the great information from Heidi, recognizing this deadline of June 16th of funds drawn from IDIS, it is a great time for everyone involved in ESG-CV to understand your internal process, to know what the timeline is from when a voucher gets submitted, how long it generally takes to get reviewed, then who has to sign off on it, who's on whose desk, either virtual or real, does it need to pass before the funds are drawn in IDIS, and for everyone to understand what that time frame is, and then to work backwards from June 16th, so you make sure you know that you have enough time to do your own internal process to ensure that those draws from IDIS are made by the June 16th deadline. Next slide. Using that great report, the beloved PR 91, as I now decided I will forever call it. That's a great way to verify that your internal tracking about vouchers that have been submitted and approved match what's drawn from IDIS. I know it feels like we've said this 1,000 different times in 1,000 different ways, but that's because it's very important. And this is just an area with, especially the states, which are so big, there's so much, there can be so much specialization in who's doing what aspect. of ESG-CV funding, review, and drawing. So using that report, you can make sure that if you got at the program level, especially you have your own internal tracking. So from where you are sitting, you look like, oh, we are really, really close, or we're even over the 50% drawn amount. But if that funding hasn't actually been drawn from IDIS, then your internal tracking is not going to be the same thing that HUD sees. Therefore, it's not going to count for the expenditure deadline. So using the PR 91 to make sure that you're all on the same page about expenditures that have been approved and those that have been drawn is a great way to know what your starting point is, and then using that timeline discussion that we talked about to make sure that you have the time to get the draws in before the middle of June. Next slide. A great place too that we've seen, because we guess as Heidi being the maven of IDIS can go in and nationally look at every ESG-CV recipient to see what's being drawn, what's not being drawn. An area where we see that across the board draws are slow is administration. So these are certainly ESG-CV eligible expenses. We know that you at the state level as recipients spend a lot of time doing ESG-CV work. So sometimes it can be difficult to stop to pay yourself or stop to do your own timekeeping, or you're so busy working with subrecipients, you're so busy doing other things. So we just want to remind you that admin is an area that is eligible, that if it's part of your plan of what you are going to spend, then you can certainly utilize that as a way to meet the draw requirement if you have not if you've not reimbursed yourself for all the admin that you have spent. Do not forget to do that. And we've talked, I know you've had some great trainings previously in the other state sessions about ways to really strategically review vouchers and the methodology where you can use more of a risk-based approach instead of looking at every single piece of paper that tracks to every single dollar for every single voucher. That is something that was previously trained on. The link to that webinar is available in case you want to refresh yourself on that concept. And if that's something that you're able to incorporate into your practices right now, then we definitely encourage that. We also encourage you to prioritize high dollar vouchers. We know that sometimes subrecipients get in the habit of submitting very, very small vouchers, which even though they're not a lot of money, can still take a decent amount of time to review. So now might be a time to sort through your vouchers, to do the high amount ones first, and then be able to get to the smaller ones after the deadline. So that's something that you can think about. You can think about also looking at other low risk strategies, low risk costs across multiple vouchers. So for example, if you have a lot of subrecipients who are paying rental assistance, and therefore participants who are returning, so you've maybe already looked at the leases, you've already done a document review of those particular households. So now you can say, well, we know that we have already seen the lease, the households are eligible. So you can batch those draws across multiple subrecipients. That might be a way that you can do things with a little bit more expediency, but still adhering to the idea of verifying eligibility, adequately verifying eligibility. And as always, you can request help. We know that this is a lot to do too. You have your state coaches. There's also a HUD regional technical assistance. A HUD field office is really focused on helping all recipients to meet this deadline too. So if you are in need of assistance, please, now is the time. Either now, like literally right now, if you wanted to ask for help, we would jump in and try to troubleshoot some things, which maybe Natalie is okay. Maybe I'll do that. Maybe I will stop talking and open the floor to anyone here who is experiencing some challenges, or maybe is thinking about a way that they might try to streamline their process and is having some questions about whether or not that's allowable.
Yeah, Nora, I think that this is a good time just to pause to talk a little bit about those barriers to voucher submissions that you all may be experiencing. We want to get a better idea of what those are exactly. I know for me personally, what I've been hearing is that usually it's the lack of backup documentation or inaccurate documentation that's submitted as a backup with those vouchers. For states that are seeing bottlenecks with regard to that specifically, and you need to kick back those voucher requests multiple times, really want to encourage you to reevaluate your policies and procedures, which could include, watching the state office hours to get ideas, or reaching out to your technical assistance team or your field office to see, I don't know if it's our process or if we're asking more than what's required, but really it's holding things up, and we're continuing to have these tug of wars with half our subrecipients. It's always a good idea to check to see if is everything that you're asking for required. I think a lot of states are risk adverse, and so to counter that, what they do is they just are extremely thorough and ask for a lot of backup documentation, even from those subrecipients that have been doing really well and have a good track record. And so, wondering if you all agree with that. If so, put it in the chat. Are you streamlining your processes to address any barriers? We'd love to hear what those strategies are. And if we would love for you to come off mute, raise your hand and Laura Harris will take you off mute.
Hi, this is Sarah Isaac from Wisconsin, and I more, I guess, have a question. So are there states or grantees that are requiring backup for every voucher that they receive? Because that's not something we've ever done. We just look at it during an annual monitoring, and then if concerns are raised. But is it the expectation that we're looking at specific backup for every voucher?
That's a great question, Sarah. Nora or Marlisa, I'll let my ESG-CV experts respond.
Yeah, I'll jump in, and then Marlisa, fill in anything to add. No, now I forget which is the yes or which is the no. So I'm going to say, Sarah, it sounds like the process you're using is that risk-based approach, and that idea that you verify eligibility during monitoring.
Yes.
So yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. And that is definitely something that is within the bounds of 2 CFR 200, and it is allowable, recognized, approved process. To Natalie's point, I think not every jurisdiction is comfortable with that. So I'm glad that you are and are able. Have you always done it that way, or is that an evolution over time? Can you talk about your process a little bit more?
Sure. So I've been in this position 4 years now, and so that's always, so when I got in this position, that's how we've always done it. So we do have the same grantees, and they've been the same for a decade. So we have lead agencies throughout the state, and then they have subrecipients within them. And so the lead agencies are responsible for monitoring their subrecipients, making sure the financials are good. And then for us as the grantee, we monitor each lead agency every year. And then we also make sure we monitor within the grant year while the grant year is still open. So if there are any errors that were found, that it can be resolved right then, because the grant's still open. And we've had good success with it. There have been times when we found some unallowable costs or something like that, but then we would go in a little bit deeper. But yeah, that's how we've been doing it.
Well,
That's
obviously you're
great.
doing something right, considering how well you're spending your ESG-CV funds.
Thank
You
you.
are quite fortunate to have subrecipients that you have a good relationship with and that have been doing ESG-CV or ESG for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to hear just kind of how broad the landscape is for how states conduct their business with regard to this specifically. It sounds like New York requests backup for every voucher, no matter how long you've been doing this work. And then I'm not sure what state it is, JSHHFC. They have a new to the program grantees where they require backup for every voucher, but only if you're new. If you have previous experience and if you've proven yourself that you can submit vouchers without a backup. It sounds like Nebraska is a hybrid approach, requiring a list of all expenditures and the backup for select number of expenditures during financial desk monitors. So that is another way to do it. And then Jessica said that their process is for subs to submit general ledgers so they can reconcile what they're requesting per ESG line item with the amounts they are requesting for disbursement. They're also looking through the general ledgers to ensure all expenses are eligible. It's prevented a lot of errors and they're monitoring as we go along. Definitely, I'm sure it's prevented a lot of errors and it's bringing up good training and monitoring issues. I'm curious as to whether, it's that push and pull, right? Like it's really good to kind of dig into these expenditures because there's always things that you can do better and little things you can, identify. However, at what point is like doing all that extra digging in work and all that staff time counterproductive to spending out your ESG funds and spending your time on maybe some other things as well. So it's kind of that delicate balance, right? But it's nice to know how other states are operating because the way you're operating isn't the only way to do it, right? There's other ways of managing this grant. So if you are curious, especially with we're getting a lot of responses on how states are managing the voucher submission, we can connect you to these other states so you can learn more about it. Just let any of us know. In Michigan, they require documentation for all expenditures, no matter what. They use a special, it looks like software to for subrecipients to upload their documents. Michigan is also broken up into 10 regions and they have 4 staff that cover document. Yeah, that's a lot, but that's a lot of subrecipients too. I'm sure you're managing. Sarah asked, what are the staffing levels for those that require backup for every, are there multiple staff? I would assume like in Michigan, it takes quite a bit of staff time just to manage that. How about everyone else?
It's just Sarah in Wisconsin.
Killing it.
Natalie, while people are responding to that, I just want to say like something I've been thinking about too, as far as, maybe now's not the time where your fiscal staff is going to feel real comfortable trimming down documentation that you get, especially if you're require more documentation. So maybe another way to approach it is organization of how the information is submitted. Because I was helping community look through their vouchers, and it is really like page 1 through page 250, and everything is mixed in there, from timesheets to payroll information. So even if it's possible, especially if they're uploading, if it's possible to upload information, maybe put all the timesheets in one subfolder and all the payroll in another one, or just to even a little bit of organization for how the information is being submitted. So you're not necessarily starting at page 1 and having to go all the way through to page 5,022. You can instead look at the various pieces of documentation as you're going through. Just something that might be helpful and useful. Oh, That's like a good
I like that in Oklahoma, you have the same staff people that review those voucher or those voucher submission, or excuse me, the invoices. That's the same person who does the monitoring. I think that's a really I like that setup quite a bit, because I know in some communities, the person who does monitoring is not the same person who's reviewing a lot of this backup documentation. There might be a disconnect there. So I like that. Nebraska also has 1.5 FTEs. They're the ones that monitor all the subrecipients and annual. Andrea, the 1.5 FTEs, is that their main job to do the review of the invoices and the backup documentation, or do they have other, is that all you have, managing the entire ESG-CV? Okay, so not just that, those are just the folks that are reviewing. Okay, I think this is also good because I know that some states are still trying to staff up. And if they can get a good idea of like the staffing levels to do all this work in other states, I think that might be helpful, especially because we are going to be doing this work for another 1.5 years. So in Nevada, their analysts are responsible for specific subgrantees. So they do, it looks like, divide it up, and they also require backup for all expenses. All right, so, as if you are requiring backup documentation for all expenses, I really encourage you to learn and maybe reach out to others that don't. That do more of a risk-based monitoring and maybe only look at a subset of those subrecipient invoices, or maybe they don't look at them at all until monitoring, like in Wisconsin. And so really want you to kind of, if possible, rethink that approach and reach out to your TA provider if you want to learn more, or if you want some assistance with reviewing that. All right.
All right. I think it's back to me for a couple more slides. Next slide. I think it's really important to communicate with subrecipients, especially ones who haven't submitted for a while, maybe either because they're also overwhelmed, which can happen with a lot of, or they're receiving multiple funding, like funding from multiple sources. So maybe they've been submitting billing to someone else. If they're a subrecipient for you and you're not at the 50% deadline, I think it's important to communicate with them to say, hey, let's like pay some attention to this right now, because it's to the benefit of everyone with who's funded by the grant to meet the target. So working with subrecipients, I think after, and maybe alongside, but definitely after you've gotten your own house in order. I've heard from some subrecipients who have expressed frustration of, okay, our recipient told us to bill, they're sitting on months worth of our bills that haven't been reimbursed. So it's really difficult to put the onus, to push the pressure down if your internal process is experiencing a backlog. So that's why it's important to do, I think, a two-pronged approach. One, which is we talked about as far as making sure you're in sync and up to date with your internal vouchers and then draws from IDIS, and then to communicate with subrecipients, either those who you haven't heard from, either about a specific line item or really at all, or others that maybe they've already hit their 50%, but a voucher from them would really make a big difference. And that can also go a long way to helping you meet your deadline. So you can also work with them if they are feeling that like, oh my gosh, I don't even know what to do. That is an area for where technical assistance can help them assemble vouchers, just kind of communicate with them, be available to support them if they're feeling like they don't know where to start. So requesting help through your state coaches or other TA can also occur at the subrecipient level. So remember that that's a resource as well. Next slide. And I think really important at the state level to communicate with internal partners, program, financial, and also with leadership that now's the time to focus on ESG-CV. We know there are a lot of CARES Act resources, a lot of other resources with a lot of deadlines. Everyone has been juggling a lot, moving a lot of money, like managing, like doing amazing efforts. And now's the time to focus on ESG-CV. It is ESG-CV's day. So we want to say that, look, Natalie's got it. It's like, oh, Natalie forgot. We were going to start this office hours.
Oh, the
Rocky theme. We were going to get you all like hyped up with the like Rocky music. So imagine I'm singing the Rocky theme song, which I will not do because it will torture you. But if you need leverage to communicate with people above you that now's the time to focus on ESG-CV, you can use this as a resource to do that. You can also pull in TA, you can pull in a HUD if you're feeling like you are like rattling at the doors and they're not paying you much mind. It is ESG-CV's day. So remember that we're here to support you to focus on that and reach out to TA, to HUD, if that's something that you could use help in getting that that prioritized within your own mechanisms, offices, structures. Next slide. I think then we go to resources. Yep, there's lots of resources available. IDIS Online, the webinar that we've referenced for the state office hours, and then some links to the various Ask a Question and other things. So that's pretty much my spiel. Do we have any other questions you wanted to cover, Natalie, or anything that's come in the chat?
Yeah, I was just kind of curious how folks are communicating that 50% spending deadline to subrecipients. Jessica said that they do have an internal spending deadline that they are holding subrecipients' feet to the fire, which is good. I think it's important to keep adjusting those spending deadlines, kind of just how the goalposts keep changing. I know that for some states, they never really changed the internal spending deadline. They had it originally in those initial contracts that they had with that 80% kind of standard in there, and they just never really adjusted it. So I think that maybe making those adjustments are helpful. If you can do it in a way that maybe isn't too much of a bear to amend your contracts. Jessica, I don't know if you can talk a little bit about how you adjusted those spending deadlines. Did you put them in a contract, or was just this something that was communicated to everyone, or did you do an amendment to a contract? I think that would be helpful to know, because I know for some states they're hesitant to make formal changes to any internal spending deadlines officially, because it would create a lot more work just on the contracting side. Andrea says that they have 3 subs that have not expended 50% as a state, but they have. So they're scheduling meetings with the subs that they haven't met. We have subs that would like more funding, so they may move funding. I think, yeah, definitely. I think this summer, actually, is maybe when the dust settles after June 16th, that it'd be really great to just kind of take a step back, like re-examine your ESG-CV resources based on this kind of new landscape that we're in, especially if you're going to be reallocating funding within your subrecipients, to really look at what your priorities are. Because as we all know, things look very different now than they did a year ago. And with other CARES Act money kind of winding down or getting allocated focused on certain things, that I think that it's a good time to look at your ESG-CV funds when you're reallocating. Let's see here. In New York, they had an eviction moratorium until the middle of January. So spending prevention funds and rapid rehousing has been a challenge up until recently. The housing market is crazy. Yeah, rapid rehousing spending is a challenge. I think, though, that one good way to, and Erica brought up this idea, like really pushing your rapid rehousing providers to spend money if they want more money, because I know what HUD is doing. If you're more likely to be reallocated and awarded additional funds if you've been spending well in rapid rehousing, right? So you can communicate that to your subrecipients as well, that if you're doing a great job and if you want additional funds, we really want to see that money being spent in rapid rehousing, because then you're more likely to get more funding. So I think if they want to be competitive, that's where it should be pushed at the local level. Jessica, with regard to their internal deadlines, they haven't officially changed them, but they let them know they'll be relaxed. They're also waiting to see if they'll receive more funds. For now, they've told their subs to spend as much as needed and not to budget out a certain amount each month to stretch it to a new end date. These are crisis funds. Yes, absolutely. I think that's a really good way to do it as well. And I think we're going to actually talk about this more at the next office hours is, how can we, how should we be viewing these funds? Are we going to be like trying to allocate a certain amount each month to kind of stretch it out, or what the strategy should be? Like, are these crisis funds and should you just be spending them on that? So that's a really good thing to think about. Andrea, also, we released admin funding earlier this year, and most of the fund requests were for shelter. With the extended deadline, rapid rehousing is more in need. Yep. All right. And then Linda said they've definitely been pushing rapid rehousing, but it is hard to find affordable units. Yes. All right. This is all really helpful information. Any other last questions while we have the remaining couple minutes? I hope this office hours kind of made you rethink how you're doing business, and maybe there's other ways of doing it that aren't so cumbersome for your staff. Give you some ideas on how you can maybe do some more risk-based approach to your financial admin. So if you do have questions more about that, or if you need assistance with, making those connections to certain states that you're interested, we're happy to help you do that. So with that, thank you very much for attending today's webinar, and I will be sending out a recording and the supporting materials for this out in the next couple of days. Thank you so much.